That in the Toma number Tengelia, that Chumji Shuda, and the Chapsik do, and Kazanga Tree, that Girim Gombe Gordy Shusimse, and that Zorim Gordy. Dorje ma, the Kajotamungelia tea demand to hang.
First of all, I would like to wish everyone my greetings, and then I will continue from yesterday. We completed the topic of the completion phase, of the creation phase meditation, and so today we will have a short teaching on the completion phase. And so first I will read from the instructions themselves.
Tane Chagachimbi Mibala Sumde Tambo Maimba Shaba Regorkin Yudu Jubado Pardo Maja Baja Neke Lamboji Gyondo Tamar Chikr Gyon Ne Zintuane Chapo de Nyamso Lango Te Tambone Gaharna Regorkin Yudu Jubado Chinagi Yukana Miba Mideba Mijengu Dengi Semri Tudurubon Dile Kam Michur Shabe Shibatam's Beshed Roshin Tiang Soye, Mijabrashab, Nankal, La Satorwa, the Chapa Mebashin Jung. Deadabon Bashin, the Chamkison de la J, Tabola Jilu, Zizi Tobasai, Nibani, Lambuchi Gyon, Zudi, put you to you, Mambu Migubata, Shiba Kona Palme Bashin, Tamburu, Yudo, the Shikishi, and then in Zinuki Loye. Then Canada on the Shechirida, Tedder, Shiba Tutu to Mason, Sheting the Major, Luxam, Simbi, Duba Chavashindo. So in Yamshin Joa, the use Sheva Zes were the Bugona Gombaino. Sumba, Chigrigone, Gazuchimbi Zintuane, Chapura, the Surlomo, and Tobamigubashin. Sem, Dingins in a Zeshidu Navy, Nanger Batala, Didudan, Nyamungo Toba Jinraji. Gayam, T. Chim, Tobam Gudi, Chigi, Tosum Khan Gavan, T. Tenyabu Tigrisimata, Chidogi, Cheshi Jube, Dinginzilla, Cham Cham Drawashiung, a Tere Cham Cham Sonata, Kuyang Ding Ding Gyongi, Tere Swan, using a Gombrachao.
There are three focuses for the main practice of Mahamudra. At first, resting undistracted like a person spinning a sword as they enter a battle. In the middle, being skilled at the key point of remaining without altering like an elephant herder. And in the end, practicing the key point of sustaining at will like a bird flying off a ship. For the first, just like an Indian sword spinner entering a battle, rest without focusing on any outer or inner object, not deviating at all from this keenly aware mind that can think of anything. By doing so, all cognitions will be completely severed. Rest in the nature of that without changing it at all, and it will not get stuck on anything, like throwing soil into the sky. When it becomes serene just like that, this is what is called the realization of one-pointedness in Gampopa's tradition. For the second, just as a herdsman tending elephants does not need to rush about much, the mind itself, like spinning wools, first falls apart upon the object, and then any cognition capable of apprehension disappears. Next, turn inwards, and without the mind becoming exhausted as if it were a deer hounded by hunting dogs, merely relax without adjusting anything out of any wish. Prolonging this state brings an experience like becoming exhausted after running. At that time, meditate like a strong man conserving his energy. For the third, sustaining at will. When a bird flies off a ship in the middle of a great ocean, there is no need to worry that it will not return. Likewise, no matter what thought of pleasure, pain, or the afflictions arises, yogis whose minds rest one-pointedly in samadhi have no need to worry that it will bind them. Whatever arises, whether the 8 concerns or 3 poisons, is entirely caught when it arises, and applying the mindfulness and awareness that blocks it makes it subside tranquilly into samadhi. As that becomes more and more tranquil, sustain it broadly and deeply. When it becomes like this, prolong it and meditate on it.
대내 가능 계절도 내지 시괴대 디도의 차단의 유의도 공로서 今这是通对陈江荣台大能既影响荣既高的体验呗陈别说呢细心那么的选择党娘连党我党苏不提了按那铺出卡尔东北呗台上呢提年党拉马党群众的国外党女罗说每个把些原因建议集中呀主是开些个呗
Next, you must know the key point for whatever appears becoming spiritual practice. Whatever pleasure or pain, greed or hatred, pleasant or unpleasant object, and so forth you see, hear, or think of, no matter what it may be. Apprehend it with the mindfulness of thinking, let it do what it wants. Then you must devote yourself to supplications, practice, and dedications to have genuine awareness. When that happens, you will no longer need to be surrounded or patrolled by instructors, gurus, or discipline masters. No matter what adversity occurs, you must know how to take it as an aid.
나도 이제야 가장 권도 주변의 신기 내줄 주기 거디 주윤기 내줄 주사도 버지디 용디 있으래.
Now, following this, there is the passage on the six yogas from the tradition of the river current.
다데 세기 내줄 아니 괴기 내줄 내강기 두베기 내 내강기 내줄 니기 내줄 디 다디 시부디 튠섬기 균기 다 간다 균도 튠섬리아 다 지냠레 차기 내줄 디 임브레 다 디네 디 띵도 포화당 파르드네 줄스 포화세랑 포화야 포화줘봐 포화당 파르드네 줄데 첸 다돔네 간다 내줄 추예 위메레 데 내줄 추팀 내가 안 추유 균기 내줄로 체 송고하래 투바디 포화당 디 파르도 내줄디 찍도 집임자
Now, following this comes these sections on the yogas, and these six yogas are these yogas of eating, the yoga of clothing, the yoga of your residence, the place where you're staying, and the yoga of sleep. These four yogas are the yogas that we do in the breaks between sessions. They're the yoga that we need to practice continually. Then in addition to these, there are the yogas for Poa and the Bardo. So these two yogas are combined into a single yoga here. So these are the six yogas in the tradition of the river current.
The tradition of river flows in Kensachanma. Chu Gundu Nyamlen Chak, Nature Race,
So the meaning of the tradition of the river current is that it is yogas that we need to do continually, like the current of a river. So one could maybe translate it as the continual flow.
주부디 차상화를지 수매에 섭시다. 니기 내줄디 유야버럽시도. 다드네 포화당 파드 내줄디 버지 유야베 섭시. 드리지미라. 다간다 드린 주사네. 다 내가 내줄디 유야베 섭시도. 간다 드리지면 차상화지 세버지 세가지지 매베 섭시.
Now, in these instructions by Mikyo Dorje, not all six of these yogas are clearly present. It doesn't seem that they're necessarily all here. There is a section on sleep. There is also a section on Poa and the Bardo, and it seems there's also a bit about the yoga of the residents. But it doesn't clearly instruct each of the 6.
대한 룰은 아주 섬을 동에 너는 민주바 나고 진짜시 중 대탐지 짐바브랑 스미인데 샘코라는 지기 뭐로 용어 샤마시 깨거베인라 대깨바나 디니 이딘도 준주기 짤종의 공개베인 대나 쉬기 라랜디 지긴 쉬기기 남 마디위 뒤다 남 요모 봐서 최단계 겐당위 뒤수 거바인 빼나 카샤르 파비 뒤수 칭버 거바시노.
No matter what physical illnesses or mental sufferings, or to sum it up, anything undesired occurs, what apprehends at all of them is your own mind. Thus you must develop a genuine experience of the mind itself not being inherently established. When that arises, you should rouse the energy of diligence and meditate. Thus at times, whenever the eight concerns make you uncomfortable, and whenever any conditions that conflict with Dharma, such as the afflictions, arise, you need such a practical application of the Dharma, just as you need some felt when it rains and snows.
다들 거비야 다들 조림기 된저의 시집산 다지 단계 가장 오늘 주변은 신기 급들이야 그 조림디 조의 차게 신비기 고네 티 조림디 차게 신비 냠내 차를 조 조심스레샤.
Now here in discussing the yogas of the completion phase, it's as I mentioned yesterday. Primarily here, the completion phase is emphasizing the practices of Mahamudra. So the completion phase here is primarily Mahamudra.
다 될래야 지당기 다 망부지 슈네 ngarange shushing mendola dana shingi chage shimbu kordi chage shimbu nyamle chabra yangyale ya energy karjush nyamlengi tada mungen ji ngonjo gi chedi nyamsu lene energy gu nurung du chene dene nyamsu lengwa ji mare hindu sane lamsa jik chaga shimbu jiki chaga shimbu nyamle gwe sawada lamsa jik tre shosho nubu jik leji nisamare.
Now actually, I don't really know how to say too much about the topic of Mahamudra. And actually, even before you begin the practices of Mahamudra, you actually need to first do the preliminary practices. You first need to do the preliminary practices in order to make your being an appropriate vessel that can contain the Dharma. And without doing this, then you can't just immediately do the Mahamudra practice. It's not as if you can just do it right away.
누르기 차게침보다 얼루기 차게침보사 니 온디 요래 안 동아가 차게침분이 개발서 말왜 개발 유다 매 소윤주 때려야 되지 그유 개발 저 시주 중세 면저와 버지 온디 유스래 엔 가시기 동아가 차게침분이랴 뭐요번에 개발요 말했으나 야 가시기 개발요를 쓰나 근데기 다지 가셔야 시주 송주 미라와 중세 용디 알아.
Now, as I mentioned yesterday, for Mahamudra there are two types of Mahamudra. There is the Sutra tradition Mahamudra and the mantra tradition Mahamudra. Now, whether there is a distinction between the two is a topic that many different scholars in the Kaiju tradition have described in different ways. There are some who say that in terms of the essence, there is no distinction between the two. There are others who say that there is a distinction between the two. And so in this manner, there are various different explanations of how it is.
다이네야 용자기 야메 다볼라지기 에다 차게 첨부들 조디 노딩인지 게볼라 공주가 나네 진짜가 토네 에너지 놀루기 차게 첨부사지 근데스 중벌에 나 될래야 경험이 유도지기 엔디 디 차게 첨부디 딱 가져래 남균 차가침이 튀는 데서는 조디 놀고 차가침이 거네 다 차가침 무슨 안다도 야나 저제 우마친 지기 다다디 더 유주신라서 원은 송백 저제 우마친 무슨 안다도 다디기 다 튼지 민가 남자 인송 간단 데게 티 개베 걸이야 에네 미세기 뭐래야지 왕구야로서 버든 고메스 가르선디 놀루 인소 다 계시 놀루 차가서 인비나 다디 뭔도지 왕고 뭔도 저거로 봐 드린 주사네 언디 균세나 되네 다 그지 남균 차가서 뷰티 개발로 조디 놀루 차가서 뷰토네 지유하는지 네 유서래
Now, as we generally say, as is generally known, when the great Lord of Dakpo Gampopa taught Mahamudra, he primarily taught Mahamudra based on the King of Samadhi Sutra. And so this is how the sutra tradition Mahamudra arose. Then later, when the Gyalwang Karmapa Mikyo Dorje spoke about Mahamudra, he said that primarily most instructions on Mahamudra are sutra tradition Mahamudra, and that this is actually the same as the unelaborated middle way taught in such texts as the Chariot of the Siddhas of the Dakpo lineage, his text on the middle way. He said that these two things are actually synonymous and the same in meaning. And so for that reason, if we're actually going to practice this Mahamudra, it's not necessary for us to have an empowerment before we do the practice, because it is in the sutra tradition. If, on the other hand, we are practicing mantra tradition Mahamudra, then it does need to be preceded by an empowerment. And so for that reason, he says that generally, with the Mahamudra instructions that we usually follow, these are most likely in the sutra tradition.
다들래야 디 곰베걸이야 안 토마르 마제베 숨다 되와지 고레 손다 마제베 숨다 되와지 다 마제베 숨송아데 가르레사나 류 마제바 나가 마제바 세 마제바 데 숨다 되와지 고레 손.
Now, when we do the meditation, there are three things that we must not alter. These three things are that we must have an unaltered body, an unaltered speech, and an unaltered mind.
다 류마 주바들라 남균 베나 남나 최듀 다 남나 남브나제 최듀사 남나 최듀 그거는 봐 가르주레지 간다르지 gomgin dukdan ru chene deade imra.
And so the unaltered body means that we are sitting in the 7-point posture of Vairochana. That means that we're sitting in the meditation posture with the 7 points.
Ta nga ma ju sunga de kap de lungru sa de sungo lungru sa ne de pranayam marbe lungru sa de 다 디소르지입니다. 룽루세네 다지 예라 숨 유엘라 숨 아니 위엘라 숨 자르데 lungru sene ene dine ji rambo su sha dire imra.
The unaltered speech here probably means that you expel the stale breath. You expel it 3 times through the left, 3 times through the 3 times through the right, 3 times through the left, and then 3 times through the center, and then you just let it be.
다드네 셈마주바 냠바샤스 셈마주베 순주산에 다 지금 대바다 마음베기 다 지금 대베 제미주 마음베 뉴미수 수반한 신기들 되게 대바다 마음베 남도기바 웬버체네 넘버 도바 마제베체네 진짜게 관에 셈 람보수 냠바샤디 임라.
The unaltered mind means letting the mind be in equipoise. This means that you don't follow thoughts of the past. You don't anticipate the future. So this means that not following the past or anticipating the future. This means that you are sort of separating yourself or isolating yourself from thoughts of the past, of the future, and then just rest in equipoise, letting your mind be.
다 당고들래야 마인버 샤바 레고르케 유도 주 받다고 소윤주 산에 따디 따디 가르르지 공기 다 가르르림버도 숨숨윤주 산 따르버 당보디 마인버 냠버샤디 그래.
And so here it says, first, resting undistracted like a person spinning a sword as they enter battle. And so there are 3 stages of meditation given here, and the first is primarily resting undistracted.
델라양 야가르기 주제 사라해 곰규 뒤점 매발라 인수 끼지 민데 바 차가 첨부 고마 인수 따디 된다데 가라스나 아니 저 차가 첨부 곰세는 고메안 곰규도 미세가 요 말았어 중세기야 요 말았어 곰스 라버레 마도지 곰규 미세 직가르에 체메 쬐바첸 수수기 언디든 디다보이냐베 거네 남도 제주체네 곰규 남도 제주체는 곰규 개요 말았어 야 곰규 매바체네 배양 가르에 다 남주 곰규 매바체인데 남주 마공바도 지고 차는 거로 봐서 대야 마인바 아니지 템베 소주면서 두산 따지 텐시에게 심버체체 다들 되게 관에 가수라지 기기야 민버체 다네 하식 드네 인두스탄에 초직네 다디 가르순 거로서는 초직네 에너지 미세기 넘버 도베기 제주로 맞으지 심 hlö기 려고 알았어 양 초직네 양 가르쇼르다 지양 심 잉내시 지양 심 잉범매베 토안에 엔 쳔베기 소주고 그래서 아데 자가 좀 고바 그래서 다들 중요하대 단도나 제지도 마인버 hlö기 로연에 냠버샤 디 디지브라 제지도 마인버 hlö르체 아네 냠버샤 디.
And so this is as the great Indian master Sarahas said, when we meditate on Mahamudra, we're not meditating, but we're also not meditating. We rest one-pointedly and relax. And so what this means, that we rest without meditating, this means that we aren't making up something that we're going to meditate. We don't have some thought, I'm meditating upon this, and particularly meditate on any particular thing. But when we say that there's nothing we're meditating upon, then if we just go about like our usual selves, and then it's as if we're not meditating. So instead of that, we also need to have we need to post the century of mindfulness. We need to apply our mindfulness so that we are not distracted for even an instant. And so one aspect is that we don't have any particular thought that we meditate upon. Instead, we just let our minds relax. The other aspect is that we don't let our minds get distracted, and instead we have the century of mindfulness. And so that is the meditation of mindfulness. So the point is that we are resting one-pointedly without being distracted and letting our minds relax.
잉매게 템바제비 유산다 디기 남도 가르샤위네 ngo셰버르지다 니주 가르쳐메이네 하고야르지 마도 고메 소메르지 메이비체 지 곰베 켄세사르 데 송도아 고메 소메제 나투메 데데아르지 데데 메이비체 엔지 시바 살스니와 당스니와 데데지여베 데데지게 토아네 남도 유아 근데 중부이비냐 디 유아 근데 중부이는 되게 되지 지 뭐셔버지다 다나 신기 하고토야르지 근데 주가디 개좀 샤디 알았음 정도 답변하지 변화샤샤위나 지 세상의 남도로 지 중부이비나 남도의 중부디 고 쳔베기 심바체네 남도 총부디 하고 용주산에야 될 미세기 세당가 남도 총순 삼네 될야야 마데와다 양지 빵랑기 디빵고도 삼바로 되게 남도 미제베체 고란랑기 딱하다 세당가 남도 차려 주선 디 코란랑 돌이야 아니 지 마임버 제지도 냠버 샤요 유산에 엔고라 런싱기 샤당의 뉴바디 충도 섬을 샤당디 규제식이 차나 kalli 엔고 런싱기 따지 뭐차에 소리 차 지당다 뉴몽버드 삼을로 지기 될야 코란 록시엔도 차디 요비 인두산에 엔 콜레 비치기 된 데비미나 되게 오텔야베 가서 제지도 셴도 메인바 된 데비미나 안 코랑 오차베 소르첸 안 갈리갈리고 딱 가서 남도 코랑 묘모모 남도 코랑 식도 알아 근데 용어를 숨어래 다른 주산에 다 같이 뒤 소르지면로 삼정도
Now, when we have such an undistracted mindfulness, then whatever thought arises, we recognize it. Whatever situation occurs, we understand. We know the situation. It's not as if we are not meditating, not doing anything, becoming blank and indifferent. That's not the sort of state. It's not like when you not as if you're just resting, not meditating, and becoming blank and unknowing. Instead, our minds are brilliantly clear. They're very vivid and vivid and clear. So when we're in that state, whatever movement of thought there is, then we just recognize it. We know it, and it's important to be able to rest in that one-pointedly. For example, if a thought of hatred arises, when that thought of hatred arises, then we catch it with our mindfulness. We know what it is. And then with that thought of hatred, we don't particularly need to think, okay, is this something I need to accept? Is it something I need to reject? We don't have the thought, I need to reject or block my anger. Instead, we just look directly, we rest in meditation directly on that thought of hatred itself without being distracted. And as we rest undistracted upon that thought of hatred itself, then naturally the power of that hatred will decrease. It's as if the hatred becomes a little bit ashamed and then disappears. So it's like this with all of the afflictions. All of the afflictions are actually misapprehensions. They're all wrong thoughts. And so when we rest one-pointedly and undistracted upon them, then it's as if they get a little bit ashamed and naturally disappear. And so that's what this means here.
Pardon, that major shawa. The language is going to 다디 조디 가르지 시바 내지 가르 시바 마이나 삼베 자와자 인기 토바 미제바 chen 시바 르이르네 냠버샤 디디지무다.
The second stage is in the middle, being skilled at the key point of remaining without altering, like an elephant herder. And so this is primarily when we, with our mind, not having the hope that we're going to be undistracted or the fear that we will get distracted, and instead just relaxing and resting in equipoise.
다디는 윤수문의 신기 시바 하장 딤 잡아 먹이바 양 시바 하장 회 잡아 먹이바
And so this is as we usually say. We must not be too tight with our minds, nor should we be too loose. And so we need to have the right amount of tension, the proper amount of tension in our minds.
다당기 남도디 모생고레스 다는 신기 남도 모생고레스 럽두스탄에 다 지기 다다 티나는 숨번는 신기 세지 리다 대대의 chen 세지 리다 대대의 chen 남도디 있으면 다 남도 제제 남도디 그 제제는 다디 건드지래도 문진고 섬 남도 제제네 가르에 우주 겸네 디디셔고 할게 엄마를 다 맞아 룩버는 적고 잠데 남도 뭐들래 남도 컨디 샤위네 디인안래야 지금 맞아 룩버를 자네 균싱 가르에 맞아 룩버는 적고 잠데 디디쇼입니다.
And so whatever thought occurs, we just need to recognize it. And saying we need to recognize the thoughts, as it says in these instructions, it says here, next to turn inwards, and without the mind becoming exhausted, as if a deer hounded by a hunting dog. Without the mind becoming exhausted, as if hounding deer like a hunting dog. We just it's not like we need to have thought arises and then we chase after that thought. I need to get that. I need to find out what that thought is, and I need to recognize that thought. We don't need to be so insistent about it. Instead, what we need to do is to merely relax without adjusting anything out of any wish. So we just need to relax and relax normally without trying to adjust anything. And then when we're in that state, we just need to prolong this experience. And so this is primarily resting without altering anything.
다디 셰부치 짤스워 더 송도아 다디 인주산 미 시슈 첨부 시슈 춘춘지나 다고 슈슈지 다워처럼 미 시슈 춘춘지다 지가르에 지기 미니 가르에 미니 파즈 다가르라다 아주 베리 셰유레 제서 지기질이야 슈체위나 복싱게지 말에 지기질 디아노지 용도와 살 디도다 다 미슈 첨부시다 매딩이지 다고 슈슈 다워처럼 고랑 슈연하면 담네 안다고 디 미디리 가르에 살 게이도 다그레스 다 미시슈 첨부지위나 그 슈시다 자고 말았어 안 고라 슈시다 마제베체네 안 고라 레라베 토네 아니 가르 미디살 기도레스 어때는 신게 rakab들이야 말아서 맞아 쑥부른 자베 가네 가르에다지 딘데게 균싱 딘데차데 제보치 미셰보치 딘데게 가르 슈시라 자먹어 발이야 다신 쿠란지 컨트롤르지 가르에다지 쿠란 가르에다 kurangi nuber masone di gyunsing tubachi ta mi shu chunju inde de tambo shu jab da ma ji jab an tama de shu zon ro ba shu zon ro du sane 거 니버면게로 차는 거래 어디 서로 뭐 임비체 들고 그래 손들 집다 드린 주산에 에너지 남도 공유 신세주산 남도 공유 신세 때 맞아 후보 냠버자 마도비 다디 남도디 제제네 아 남도디 이심미신도 따고야 개요 말해서
So it's like, as it says here, meditate like a strong man conserving his energy. So it's like, if you're really, if you don't have a lot of strength, if you're not very strong, then you have to use all of your strength. For example, if you have two people who are wrestling and trying to throw each other to the ground, like a contest of strength, they're wrestling, one's trying to throw the other to the ground. So if one of the people is just not all that strong, that person has to use all of their strength and all their power to try to throw the other to the ground. And if they don't use it, they won't be able to throw the other to the ground. But if someone's really strong, a really powerful person, then they don't really need to do much. They just sort of use a little bit. It's easy for them. They can easily throw the person they're wrestling with down to the ground. And so it's the same thing here. When we are resting in equipoise, not altering anything, and resting naturally, we just continue then then we don't need to use all our strength. We don't. We just recognize the thoughts, and then we just naturally have some control, and we just can prolong that. And so it's like that strong man who is able to, who has all that strength. He just naturally is in control, and naturally has the power. He just needs to conserve and conserve his power and make it last a long time. But if you're weak, the weak person has to use all their strength at first, and then once they've used it all up, then they don't have anything left. We should not be like that. Instead, and so that means that when we're resting in meditation, when a thought arises, we just recognize it, and then we rest naturally and clearly in equipoise. We don't at that point need to follow it and say, oh, can I recognize this thought? Can I catch it? Can I recognize that thought? That is not necessary.
아드네 숨바디 림바 숨바디 지거 동화 삼 지거 동화 진토네 차프로와도스 아 다디 숨레 다디 잠시 전부 사라해 싱니프의 자로 치신 꼬르신 라얀테로 파우스 다 숨바다 된 숨바 이브라 드린 유산에다 싱암 감들 징숭어다 너나 징의 싱이 지부이브라 싱스도 주징 첨부이브제 주징 첨부데 다 자수 첨부 기리아 주징 첨부 주징 다 첨부들 누구로 봐? 다 디나로 주징 나로 참삼 에너지 가르죠 차든데 차로든데 다 자든데 부족이스래. 다 주진나는 봐 부족이스다는 그 자수 첨부시비 인상. 아니 프로세스 밥사를 개매인다 양결수 주진간이야 주로 용거레스. 다 배테다 최송바 인송래.
The third stage is practicing the key point of sustaining at will, like a bird flying off a ship. And so this is like the example given by the great Brahmin Saraha. Just as a bird that flies off a ship will circle and circle and then land there again. So here the example is if you have a boat or a ship, so it's a large ship, and if it goes into the center of the ocean. Now sometimes on ships they would carry birds, and if you let the bird go from the ship, the bird will fly off from the ship. But the ocean is huge. There's no place for the bird to land, and so eventually the bird will return and land on the ship. And so the meditation here is said to be similar to this analogy.
다디 당기 공도 베 셈 띵인진 쯔지도 내야다 당부대 지지지 다 림바 마주 냠버 저거디 송제 다 덴저비기 가수지 냠내 예데베게 nen저버 지기 가수다 지기 간을라우다 남도 도바 칸데 샤위 미네야 디기 칭외 도바 남도 디기 칭외 도바 남도 디기 나가주래 슈겐 에펙트 요하르 데가 도바 먹여봐 레도 먹여봐 다들 거네 고 베나 최예가 남도 중내한다 야나 요모 도숨기 도바 충분히나 한다 간데지 충분히 미네야 람산지 님부 신토야지다 안 텔레야 텐시 때네 다가랑 기톤 지 띵질리야베 람산 로토야르지 딘데지 용거레스
And so as we described before, when the mind is able to rest one-pointedly in samadhi, you have you can relax in this, and you have a yogi who is able to practice in this way. Then whatever thought it is that arises, there is no fear that it will bind them. There is no fear that it will have any effect of them. They don't need to have any fear. They don't need to have any hopes or fears about their meditation. And so whatever arises, whether it be the 8 worldly concerns or an affliction, one of the 3 poisons, whatever occurs, then they just catch it immediately, and then they apply their mindfulness and awareness. And by doing so, then it immediately becomes their samadhi.
자 남규 셔탑 숨숨거봐 셔탑 숨숨하다 가르스나 내나 내토도 샤 균나 규토도 샤 징나 지토도 샤 숨마다 신기 간다지 셈 미베유스 다셈 디토를 셈디 내도나 데네바랑 그 토래야 다가랑 토래야 에너지 제주 냠버샤 야셈디 균네 somara number to gyuyebina number to ba damre de chegyebina ya dagarang tolba number sha andaji o 통보입니다. rigba사 o 통보지 고면로 다 드지 통보이면 다랑 tor number sha 마도 베 텔레 셴기 다지 야 지라도 미자와 삼성 아주기 미바데세기 미 다가르 셈네세기 다 땡데 베르지 남도르 주비나 다가랑 균짱 야 넘버 또 사버를 차려미나 다 넘버 또 닝버디 토래야 모두 냠버 샤마도 체 넘버 또 사버 주비면 다야 가르쳐야 되지 제버르 짠도 두사네 알아서 마대지 용되겠다 모두니 가서 미버지랑 토래야 미베 유디지랑 또 내고야 집에서 매서 이나 주디 수수기自己의 전시의 균장투입니다. 미버데세 유디 고로 저거 가서 잡아입니다. 주수수기 다自己의 전시의 균 덴투의 종입니다. 벌써 저기에 버리지. 그렇지 이거다.
And here it's said that there are 3 different methods for resting. There's resting, there is staying within staying, there's staying within motion, and then there's staying on the objects. And so when we rest with our mind one-pointedly, then with our minds undistracted, then we can just rest right within that one-pointedly. That's resting within the mind that's staying. And sometimes there are thoughts that happen. There are many different thoughts that arise and happen. There are various different thoughts. And when they happen, then you just rest on the thought. Sometimes there's like the object. You have the object. Like if you see the empty nature, you see it. You just rest right on that. You don't. And then if that object changes and you think about something else, then you don't. Then you just. Then you rest right on that object. You don't have any great hope that you have to keep your focus on that previous one. So you have something that you're a support or a focus for your meditation. And if that changes, you don't have to think, oh, I need to go back to the old one. Instead, you can keep on the remain on the new support or focus of that, as long as you are able to maintain your mindfulness and awareness. It's not like you always have to stay on the same focus or object of your meditation one-pointedly. The point is that you're able to maintain your one-pointed focus with mindfulness and awareness. And so if the object of that one-pointed awareness changes, then that's not a problem. It's okay as long as you're able to maintain the continuum of mindfulness and awareness.
다디 신의 냠술린 수지 심다 드링주스다네 다디 도두즈 슈트베 수시야네 다 하동기 냠술린 하동 냠술린 수디 미세 다 드든디나로 가져야다지 야미기도 티나를 미세 세가지게 솜도 다디 마시는 죽으면 마시는 죽으면
And so this is a brief teaching on the methods of resting in shamatha meditation. Now here, for the methods of resting in equipoise on insight meditation, they're not explicitly described in the instructions by Mikyo Dorje. And since they're not described here, I think it's okay not to speak about them now.
다들 디젤 주의균 내저 주디 거래야 너도 주의 다이는 티드마 쉬잖아 sometimes.
And so next I will talk about the 6 yogas of the continual flow, but first I will read from the instruction text itself.
내 강도 친게 뇌티 샤의 강도 walgi 곰네 semje 담제 투지점으로 곰데 대바 통통화를 곰거베 니기 내줄라 니도 로가라 청북도 남카 오탕라 셈데디 미도버샤는 예월차오 치외잖아 대배셈 개체데 대아랑기 당부로 강라 내줄도 차와데 치거야 대라 제거베 줄 파바제레서 온주 살드데 대인인가 랑기닝가 셈경오 외기 공부 깔보실래 이게 정말 자셀기 집어더버시 미기 디 자살세디 자게 나로라 주사사입니다 아체 야야 좀 된디기 셴네 오만에 비면 셰숨비 겐셴네 랑심기 공부 이게 주마다 제바 파베 공방도 큐바 공바이노
So it says, no matter where you go, meditate clearly that the world is a palace and all sentient beings are the great compassionate one. You must meditate with ardent faith. For the yoga of sleep, when you are falling asleep, focus on a clear blue space at your fontanelle, rest in non-thought, and sleep. At the time of death, it is important to feel faith. When you are dying, you should practice whatever you first practiced as your yoga, so visualize noble Avalokiteshvara above your crown. Focus on a white sphere of light, the essence of your mind, on which the 6 syllables are written as if in vermilion. Meditate that the Bhagavan saying Om Mani Padme Hum provides the condition for the sphere that is your mind and the 6 syllables to achieve the state of the noble being.
다들이야 다다리디 주름기 내저디 주베젤이야 젤이야 뭐와도 몰람 체네 뭐와도 몰람다 데와디지 고여다 뭐와도 몰람 체 다들 체네 냠슬래야 버드린 두사다 방부들이야 가서 공도 주변에 기름 냠렌디소 야보시 냠슬래 안데 갈라 간섭으로 템버로 톱에 젤이야 안 조름기 체디게 냠슬래 대다담지 계속이 튠 간제지미네 디 슈들이야 골이야 cam로 심게란 데와 죽어 몰람데 데와 dinti goye wimbare da da de chu yu ne chu sa de twin sam ne jo yimbare.
And so after completing the practice of the completion phase, then you need to conclude with the dedications and aspirations. Whatever practice you're doing, you need to conclude with conclude with the dedications and aspirations. So as I described yesterday, first you start with the creation phase practice, and when you can practice that well and it is stable, then you begin the completion phase practice. Then whatever phase you're doing, whether the creation or the completion phase, you begin with refuge and bodhicitta, and you conclude with the meditation, with the dedications and aspirations. And following that, you engage in the 6 yogas of the continual flow, which are the practice for between sessions.
다 당부디 내주 주고난 당부디 세기 내주인 바래. 다 세기 내주디 컨디지 공고르사나 냠슬랭 고르사나 러니 라이쿠 제네스 꿀이야. 다 공도 셰바는지 곰 디지올이야 라마 곰 다 수수사기 다 세디 지 라이 두지 임바곰 다들이야 이기숨 오마홍 이기숨 진기럽 야 근데 다 러니 하르세 여베체 에네 지올라 라마 여베체 대마세 랑기 류기 난기 지 심부디즈 박테리아에서 말다데 박테리아 있어봐 심부디즈 있네야 하세와체 대마세비 주기 심전 탐지기 하세와체 된제가 토안에 가르르지 상월로야 지 샤세 두지 쳐바피와 몇바체 쳐바피와를 때네 안 탐지베 투 베지 니에네 베투 개버총네 투 개버총발을 때네 다지 초조바스 초조베 몇바체 나디 세기네 주듯이야.
The first of the 6 yogas of the continual flow is the yoga of meals or food. And so how do we practice this? Well, first of all, you visualize yourself as the body of the deity, Avalokiteshvara. Then you visualize above the crown of your head, you visualize your guru. And you imagine that that your food becomes divine Amrita nectar. You bless it with the three syllables, Om, Ah, and Hum. So you're visualizing yourself as the deity, you're visualizing the guru above the crown of your head. You also visualize that all of the parasites and all of the bacteria within your body are also become the body of the deity. And so as you visualize that all of the inhabitants of the universe, all sentient beings, also are the deity. And then you imagine that you are offering them, all of them, the food and the Amrita nectar. And as they receive it, they are all pleased and delighted and all very satisfied.
다 라마니에 친구배 가르송으로서나 될래야. 당완 딘더버지 마테 공라스 당완 딘더지 마토 공래야. 세사자 탐지 최송 둔주자사와의 개발요 말았어. 아주 클래스 사자 상으로 최송 자사와의 둔주자사와의 개발요 말았어. 당완 딘더버지 톱 친제래야. 세 컨디지 서버이네. 저 서버 좀기 총리 용수 조배. 다 고바첨부 예송. 레인주스탄에다 대디기 가수에다지 디 공개에 그것이 때문에.
What Lama Nyen Simpopa said is, before we receive these instructions, that no matter what we eat, it's no different than an animal eating. So whatever food we have, it's just like a brute or an animal eating. But
animal eating grass.
Like an animal eating grass. After we have received these instructions, then just merely eating has the purpose of bringing us to perfect the 2 kayas. And so here he is teaching the purpose of this meditation.
라바도 안주 긴주버디서 개침을 차리요. 처비야사데. 나중에는 균 배는 자지 통배이나 얘네 잠셔피. 근데 샤다 루스 시비어봐. 대여고 응게 라마코 만남지 담반남지 순균리야 그러지 이제 잠시연된 대체비는 꼬집 장거렸어 꼬집 장거렸어 저 소설 비면 맞지 라마도 구절이야 표시 안디지 실업 수도 전에는 수수 동아를 대체하되 꼬집 장 초도 규바레스는 송도와 아주 잠주 지났던데서 얘네 잠주에 살롱 매우지 랍사 통샤로 봐. 다이는 오늘 전에 재밌는 다지 삼로를 당치 꼬르사디 지당 꼬르사디데 가르주에 꼬르사 치디 벽에기 꼬르사 치디 균어를 참말로 구어래 균어를 미래 균어를 꼬르사디 균어를 구어래 다이는 겁들이야 아주기 rabdu chungwa namji ta longjiyak gyunorte zola korla kore nam yu kodib chimbores korba ta til misegi rabdu chungwa namgi longjejegi ta gyunorte zo misegi de ngajo ta ji sabsab shibu chagwa gyumsen karasana ta de samlo 대바쟁이 진다도 표시하네 대바쟁이 진다도 ngazo 이제jen 봐 고란도 초조로 집어 창그랬으면 이제제는 아주 필요 봐. 따이네야. 아주 다 가르쳐 구주 이제 잡는 시정 아주리야. 딱다지 메두사네. 다 되기 가르쳐에 지기 디버처럼 차가랬어. 라버도 지 소수기 남균에 배 후다 바다를 지네. 소수 남균에 약으로 제되기 위해는 남균에 꼬르 사르는 가사들이야. 꼬르 롱제들 수dim대마다 저와토바지 고르 송도와 수dim대마다 저와토 시마도 꼬르 사드 불륜 차그랬어. 불륜 렌차 차그래들 송도와 다 수dim대마다 저와토바지 고르 송도산다 수수 남균에 진짜게다지 저와토바스도 단 또버 귤기야지 고르바 또버 귤기유다 갈라카브레 다 수dim대마다 수dim 나지마도 매비네야 되고 숭통에 유숭 된게도 지미나 다시라 지 꼬르세비네야 꼬르롱제비네야 다 오즈 인기르다 제마도 다디 네바 첨부 유숭 봐 되게 주산에 디균선 되는 아주들 잠주연돼야다 돔치 성으로 다지 칼라마세 건 쳐봐야 되게 개주시버스 꼬르비자 수술을 된데가 뉴바 매비네야 라마도 군절리아베 가르쳐야 따지베 최바스 피니 에너지 진다 진배다부터 다기 가르쳐 따지 가르쳐 총리 저 dim니차 된데기 삼 동안 계집쇼 된데지 삼 다음에 신행 아주 다 오늘 전에 수수이네 지 레균델이야 가르쳐야 따지 이제 여버를 선톡으로 봐
And this is especially important for the Sangha. So this is like we have the tradition of always making an offering whenever we have tea or food. We always make the offering. And the great masters of the past say that we do this in order to avoid getting any of the obscurations from eating what in Tibetan is called the kora. This means the offerings to the Sangha. And so we first imagine that we're making an offering to the lamas and the three jewels, and by doing this will be able to purify any of the obscurations of eating the offerings. Now, actually, we all use this word in Tibetan frequently, the word kora, or offerings to the Sangha. And in general, actually, the Tibetan word itself really means all wealth. But here, in particular, it means the material things that the ordained members of the Sangha use or enjoy. And so there's what is said to be the great danger of having the obscurations from these offerings. And the reason for this is that all of these offerings are given by sponsors who have great faith in the Sangha, and they have belief in the Sangha. And so we have to give them something to believe in. If they don't have something to believe in, then there's the danger that we ourselves will have the obscurations that come from it. It is said to be a grave misdeed. And so that is why we always talk about these dangers of the offerings to the Sangha. It's said that if you are someone who
liberate
so it's said that if you are someone who either has discipline or liberation, you can use these offerings. But otherwise, if you use these offerings, then you will accumulate a karmic debt. It'll be like you have unfinished karmic business and a karmic debt. And so usually it's difficult for us to achieve liberation. That means that you have to have developed realization within your being. But if you keep discipline, even if you only keep one of the vows, if you're someone who keeps only one of the vows, and then you accept and use the offerings to the Sangha, then it's okay. It's not so bad. Otherwise, there is a great otherwise it could be great offense to do so. And so this is why whenever we this is why we always recite the tea offerings or the food offerings. It's in order to avoid the obscurations of accepting the offerings. We may not have the power to avoid this ourselves, but if we make the offering to the gurus and to the three jewels, then by their power, it's able to purify that. And what this shows is it's a sign that we have great faith and confidence in karmic cause and effect.
다들 니바데 거기네 저래 다 거기네 저도 직벌해서 다 공시에는 다 둘러지 둘러싸버지 충분히네 저기다 미세 둘러싸버지 나는 이 둘러 그뒤 괜한 지금면도 라버도 둘러싸버지 겸비미나 다들 지금 하이 그런지 상버지 매버체제 신기럽네 다 오마호스 람나 드그멘도다 오마호스 람데 친게 람네 야 당기 공도시아바는 신기 라니 라르세와 단다 제기 지기 스미다미 라르세와래야 에네 쳬밤비베 메바체 드르르샤 다드네 숨바디 녀와 내항 내주스 다르니 수수유가 나는 녀베이나자 야나 미신다가 나는 녀베이나자 야나지 양 캉바 매대바 된저기 지기 양 사동 된저리 녀베이나자 다지기 상물로지 가수에 샤예캉 질 교수님이 매바첸 대한다 지금 쳐바퓨인 소말다지 야 하달라말이야 쳐바퓨 내가 돈에 초조바 교수님 매바첸입니다.
The second of the yogas is the yoga of clothing. And so whenever we get clothing, and especially when we get new clothes, but it can be whatever we wear regularly, but especially when we get new clothing, we imagine that when we put it on, that we're dressing the body of the deity. We first bless the clothes by saying Om Ahom, and then we visualize ourselves as the deity, we visualize all sentient beings as the deity, and imagine that we're offering the clothing. The third of the 6 yogas of continual flow is the yoga of the residence. And here you visualize wherever you're staying, whether it be your own home, someone else's home, or if you're sleeping out in the open outside of a home, you imagine wherever that you may be as being that it all becomes a palace. And then you offer that palace to the gurus and to the gurus and to the deities, and so this is perfects the accumulations.
다드네 시바디 타기 공동에 지슈 가르쳐데 내줄 주기 장가지 슈이바 데다 중세면 저들이 샤마쿠자 예라 티 나로라 시바디 저와 고르에네 저르스도 당기 공동에 시바디 니기네 주 쉬인바 이내 샤마르 꾸저 예라기 티 나라라 시바 거르웨 난조르소 거르웨 난조 사디 서그만블레스 멜레션 두짐자 수수 예쇼알이야 지 가르르다 지 제레시 가르르다 rum부치 야마나 지 셰메칸 야나 최대 드르지여지 디위래야 바보투지 심보 다조 코르드제 슈여베 메바체 엔 델레야 고와체베 메바체 단도나 지가르 로아 탐지 인지민지 가르로 꼬라자가 루두스탄에 곰바질 꼬라자고 최대로 꼬라자고 개요 말스 데데수수 사모땅 투나 남균 드가스 로데비나 데 꼬라쳐요 알스 데데소입니다
Now, the fourth of the 6 yogas is the yoga of circumambulating. Now, actually, this is a slightly different way of listing them than I mentioned before. But what it says in the instructions by the 6th Shamar Kunja Yenlak, it says that this is the instruction of circumambulating. And so, the other one it said sleep, but here it says circumambulating. So this means that no matter where it is, wherever you go, you imagine that you are circumambulating, that to your right side there is Avalokiteshvara. You imagine that to your right side there's either palace or a stupa or whatever, and in the center of that there is the great compassionate one surrounded by his entire retinue of deities. And as you go, with each step you imagine that you are circumambulating him. And so in this way, each step that you take becomes circumambulating, and for this reason there is no longer any need to necessarily go to a stupa or to a temple to circumambulate. Even your normal going about your business becomes circumambulation.
다드네 ngabadi ngabadi chamar kunjo yela ki thi na la ni ji ne ju sung yimde.
In the instructions by the Shamar Kunja Yenlak, the 5th is the yoga of sleep.
Da teleya jigi nyamsu lendar number 2 yusre jig teleya rani idam du se me bache kon 주변에시 rani idam du se bache ti jiwo leya lama kundu ki kaza 주변에시 lama kundu lama ji gorbata lama kundu di setup 다드네 수수기 lama kundu di setup ne rang ninga da 가르래 랑게 닝가 주다 아니 베 닝가디 닝게게 따자 우마디 바 데네게 되지 가르래 저버실에 되지 근데 삼탄 주사네 닝갈래야 아니 가자 20셈바 처형 강화사지 여러봐 20셈바 처형 강화들이 검체 다 텔레 외설주 20셈바 처형 강화 되게 두간에 외설주에네 외설디 야르폰 그 가르쳐서나 닝게게 자다 지주가 자다 데네여베 인주사 디버를 자 우마 데네여베 인주사네 다디기 20셈바 처형 강화 될 외설이 야 띵기 라마라포 라마라포바들 데네 라마디 지주리에베다 라마디 지중도 치네 타 대본점도 교는 봐 집중 다 집중도 충중을 다 집중점도 교내스 다 대본점도 교내스 남들도 다 대본점도 교내 에는 마중 다들 마 자우만의 교내 말 전에 아니 닝게기 이시스 바디기 지울라 르다 수도 쇼유에 삼베 메바착고스 다든데 전에 메바체네 아니 남도 ram도 마제비체네 다디기 튠도 지르와 니고메고 튠르와 되네 당부 대미바데 다든데 고네 튠기 줄래야 아니 동맥경도 hlö기 뢰네 아니 배 동맥경도 봐 샤네 에 일침비미나 아니데 가수해 다들 니기네 줘임 버려서
Now, there are two different methods for practicing the yoga of sleep. The first is that, as I described before, you visualize yourself as the Idam deity, and then above your crown you visualize the gurus. But this is the union of all the gurus. You visualize the union above the gurus above your head. In your heart, you visualize the wisdom being, who, as I mentioned yesterday, is a finger in length, or finger length in height. And so you have the guru above your crown of your head and the guru in your heart. And in between the two places, there is the central channel that goes directly between the two. So you have from the wisdom being inside your heart, you imagine that light radiates. And this light radiates and goes up the central channel, because the central channel connects the two. As the central channel goes from your crown to your heart, it goes directly up the central channel, and it strikes the guru above the crown of your head. And as it strikes the guru above your head, the guru above your head gets smaller and smaller until the guru becomes the size of your thumb. And then when he becomes that size, and he comes down, and he then sits above the crown of the wisdom deity in your heart center as the lord of the family. And so you imagine this, and then you then try not to have any other thoughts. And so this is the session that you do when you're going to bed. You first do this visualization, you hold the visualization, and then at the end you relax into emptiness and you rest, and while resting in emptiness you go to sleep. And so this is the session of yoga to practice when you go to sleep.
제가 디 퍼지들이 지는 배는 수수 배대 내가 상문 치사다 니에르메 걸이야 고 니세 강라 바 대시 니지 강라 대 니는 딱 당기디 고매하듯이 곰 라지야듯이 고 미버대야듯이 바대 다드네 타마들이야 튠기 주도 어느 바 동메기가 지 가르쳐지 셈hlö네 남도 가마 집시 셈hlölö치 대행하는 거 셈hlölö치 아니 내가 신다게 맞으시 따고 니에 되나 아 버지 딘데 소치 버지 이마다 마도야 양 가시에 삼려 나로 얘는 니지나 마 니세나 마 니에네 곰되나 다디지 괜찮처럼 상기지 제레시디 기름 젠데도 알아 소소니 니에도 알아 디지 데버시람도 와
And so the way you do this yoga is that you first sit on your bed on top of your blankets. You sit there and you go through this, after you've done everything else, you don't have anything left to do, you sit on your blankets and you go through the stages of the visualization as the deity and so forth. And then you do the whole session, and at the end you rest in emptiness, relax your mind, not thinking of anything else. And then, without doing anything else, you lie down and go to bed. And so that's how you should do this session. Otherwise, it's kind of strange. If you lie down and try to do this practice while lying down, then Avalokiteshvara is sitting, in the meditation posture, and it's cross-legged, and you're lying down, and that's just kind of strange. It's not so comfortable.
다야나니 여미규도지 티 나로래 미세디 하고 공부하고 계속도 니도 저거 청부도 스다 수수기 청부리아 지금 남카사디 가고 남카사디 지 스페이스 동바르지 남카 오당라 셈데데스 지 지주기 따지 지주기 태려야지 가서 따지 동리고 가서십니다 지 파나 동바르지 딘데질이야 봐 셈데네 아니 지 미세기 따지 변하지 니마지 나로 따 내가 먹고 싶지에는 엔다 간다 남도 먹고 싶죠 봐 따 디기디 남도 디기디 파나 동바 셈도 때지 남도 디기디 파 상네 안 가야매 가르에 되게 지고로 셈네 지고로 매베체 되게 또는 다 가르쳐 지고 셈된 미도뱅알 동력이 된 동력이 된 중세 전에 있는 저거 알아 되게 또는 아니 냠버샤 중세 지 공점 아니 많이 해난 저거 알았어 되게 송도 빠지 되게 제난 저거
The other one is as mentioned here in the instructions by Mikyo Dorje for the yoga of sleep. When you're falling asleep, focus on a clear blue space at your fontanelle, rest in non-thought and sleep. And so here, space, this means like an empty space above the fontanelle or the crown of your head. And this is like meditating on emptiness. So you focus your mind on an empty space above the crown of your head. And then, without many thoughts or many things to do, you focus on this space, and then the thoughts all dissipate. And so you rest within this, and so the fontanelle. Yeah, so it's the fontanelle that is above the crown, at the union of the juncture of the bones and the skull. It's the fontanelle. And so you rest in non-thought, meditating a bit on emptiness, and then if you lie down, it's fine. And so practicing in this method is also okay.
다 당한 니도 토베 젤이야 니 튠지 로바 이네야 충이 연수 조베 거바 예스 제가 남준 다 니사디 머니 콜레고 개외 남도 시스템에 니 니에 니 개와 처예스 미게 남도 시스템에 나 니 미게 처예스 그 시오르 근데 인주스탄의 뒤준전 때네 간다 디디지기 냠네 제시베 중원입니다 아주 미지체가디 and
so Lama Nyen Sempupa himself said is that before we receive this instruction, we spend half of our lives no different from animals. That means that it's basically pointless, our lives. But once we have achieved, or once we've received this instruction, then even our sleep becomes a way to perfect the two accumulations. And the reason for this is often said: if at the time of sleeping, if your mind, if your mind is imbued with a virtuous thought, then the sleep also becomes virtue. If your mind is infected with an unvirtuous thought, then the sleep becomes unvirtuous, as this is often said. And so, once we have these instructions and we practice them, then then this half of our life also becomes spiritual training.
다디 젤이야 주버디 샤머쿠저 예라 티나로라 추윤기네 주 듄지 송샤 가레스나 니디지 가자디 아래 치게기 포화드 찍지 수르두지 포화드 수르두지 엔디젤 파르도드 수르두지 듄차로로 당기에 슈두사는 포화드 파르도 니냠도 지셔로 제가 주마도 요만에 다이네 포화드 파르도기 냠랜디 데즈지 냠랜 개버를 지레샤 미름디 좀 하고 싶다 차도 제가 드린데 슈마고체 다이네 공기 냠랜디 야고 제샤 따바지 드면
Now, the next yoga, according to the sixth Shama Rinpoches, actually there are 7 of these yogas of the continual flow.
7 or the fifth Shama Rinpoche.
The fifth Shama Rinpoche. There are 7 of these yogas. After yoga, after the yoga of sleep, there is the yoga at the time of death. And the yoga of the bardo, and so putting these together, that makes 7 different yogas. But as I said before, if you count the yogas of Poa and the yoga of the bardo together, then that becomes 6. Now the yogas of Poa and of the Bardo are actually quite long, and there are many visualizations to be done there. And so I think it's okay not to go through them today. In any case, if you do the practices I've already described well, then I think everything will work out just right.
다들 라마 규림 슈아이 지나는 수문한 신기. 대다를 파바제에서 온 투시엠 친부 머티인데 규림니. 파바제에서 온 도시 nenjor마. 주진 친부바 질해바. 딱디 장마르와 해준 근사바. 군방바 야와이시 기준인데 야소. 최지 군현시험 양원 공급에 양원 수남 상부 군현 잠배 상부 주진 뜻이 변조 디 뒤좀 상계 탐지 현진 잡아 타다 지를 뒤비等이 냐매 탐지게 빨까마 붙이고 양원 미유도지 총라오 시시 변고 담바른 신기 현는 디신티 까즈베 랑수 니티 중세 잠매 버게 지베게 투이 예메쇼 디 원주 capsim so jenigi zala suxin de ngüshi chaxian su chubu jiazan de chungde ngo chujin cimbu bi ti sorsha zede sungba yong cha dewe sindi chewe je jelam do pabe nianzhong jin yino.
And now to go through the lineage of this practice, as it says in the instructions themselves. The lineage of Tsembupa's direct instructions on the great compassionate one, Noble Avalokiteshvara, is Noble Avalokiteshvara, Vajrayogini, Mahasiddha Tsembupa, Chitlepa, Takte Jat Marwa, Latsun Gunsarwa, Gunpangpa, Gyawa Yeshe, Ketsun Yutin Gyatso, Chuje Kunchin Chenpo, Nyatwan Kungapal, Nyatwan Sunam Sambo, Kunchen Chambo Sampo, and Drupchen Tashi Paljor, who gave it to the great being who embodies all the wisdom, love, and deeds of all Buddhas of the three times, the unequaled, omniscient, glorious, great Karmapa Mikyo Dorje. The glorious guardian of existence and peace, the exalted precious Lord, commanded me to write this down in this manner. So I have written it down without the slightest fault of making anything up. By this merit may our minds be inseparable. Mikyo Dorje himself wrote the preliminaries, refuge, bodhicitta, and so forth. The field of accumulations, main practice, and Mahamudra were taken from Tropu Gyatso, the essence of which is based on the Mahasiddha Tsembupa's instructions. Yung Chadawa took these notes, which were shown to Mikyo Dorje, so they can inspire confidence.
다디 라마 유림디 두스오레 지당기 주진 침부발레야 로마 지주기 텐젤 로마 지주기 다 당완들 규바 유림 규바 컨제에나 스컨디 슈브레스 당와 제레스기 당완들이야 규바 컨제에나 스컨디 슈브레스 엔디리자는 공기 데스 그 유른저버지 나가레스 그 유른저버지 다 데스 가서 규베림바디 가르레스 끼저티는 가르치기스 캬스 규베림바 끼저티는 가르치기스 마시 캐랑 미신달레 신년도스다 미신달레 최디 당완디 신도랑네 어다 규바 칸데레스 끼저티야디 캬스 야가레 야가가레미도스 가서 미신달 디 마시에오삼 젠도스 다 시두산다 규바르 시야예나 아니 야버르죠르바다 규버셴 이나 녜기 쳔디 시규 쳔미 냠슬린 규쳔 인스 밀시아 쳔미 소수 냠슬레아 쳔 인스 데네 인두산에 강주기 규베르마 진이 가르치기 인스 중세 투마니 바레스 데네 소수지.
Now, there's a story that when Lama Tsembupa taught these instructions, these fifth instructions to his students, they then asked him, well, what is the lineage of these instructions? And when they asked him this, then Lama Nyen Tsembupa scolded them a bit. He said, why are you asking about the lineage? You're asking about the lineage because you want to teach these instructions. That's the only reason you need to know what the lineage is. You want to teach them. So that's why you're asking about them. But I'm not, because, and you know, if you are teaching something, if you say, oh, this is the lineage of the instruction, it looks good, right? So Lama Tsengbupa said, my Dharma isn't Dharma for teaching. My Dharma is Dharma for practicing. This is the Dharma that you need to practice it. And so he scolded them in this way when they asked him about the lineage.
지린데 미신다 셰디게자 소수이 냠스 렌토고 마르다 있네 셰디게자다 규림 마시라시로 받아 제자다 규림 셰두산다 도진nen조 뭐 주진 신부바드준 셰모체 다 주울 해바사들 예 가서 직 논주쇼샤 주울 해바디 공기 브라더 가르 공기 중부를 슬라이마디 노샤 공기 중부디야 직부바 사야도 데레샤 직부바드 주울 해바니 노르체 혼이 민데 라우르스도와 제자디 노르샤 아나 콘리아 로마 추요 당화짐 로마 추요 다 디나는 조디 주울 해바디 아 주울 해바 청주에 제가 질 해바 수야데 주울 해바 청주어라 고요래
And so here I am teaching others this practice when I'm not able to practice it myself, and so it's like no choice for me but to go through the lineage of the instructions. But so as I said here, I described the other day that coming from Vajrayogini to Mahasiddha Tsengbupa, and I don't need to mention that again here. And then he gave it to Chilepa, or Chiwolepa. Now, yesterday, or the other day, I said that Chiwolepa was his brother, but actually that was mistaken. His younger brother was actually someone named Chikbupa. And so the names are kind of similar, and so that's how I mixed them up. So Chiwolepa, or here he's called Chilepa. Chiwolepa was one of his 6 disciples who received these instructions. And so this is the first of these 6 disciples, Chiwolepa Changchupa.
He's the main disciple.
He's the primary disciple, Chiwolepa Changchupa.
나디네 딱지 장마를 왔어야디 딱지 장마를 써야디 다시 룽베 민드짐자 딱지 써야디 룽베 민지 장마를 써야디 장마를 써야 고바지여자 디기 캠보레스 공급산의 청주 수준 쇼레스 다디임자.
The next one, Tate Drak Marwa, here saying Tate Drak Marwa. Tate Drak means the name of a region, and and Drak Marwa is the name of a monastery. He was the Kempo, or the abbot of this monastery, and his actual name was Jangchup Sultan.
다디 제 러준 권사르바 쉬아드레 러준 권사르바 사디 다 권사르 사지 고바지여제 디 캠보 임자 디 권사르데네 러준 권사르바 쉬아디 임자.
And so the next one is Hlatsun Gunsarwa. So Gunsar is the name, it seems to be the name of a monastery, and it seems he was the Kempo, or abbot of this monastery, so that's why he's called here the Hlatsun, or the venerable god, or the venerable master Gunsarwa.
다디 제라 군방바 디 공기 동류네 버지 상이마다 상사 루규디 상지 상 군방바스 다 상군방바 디 란능주산 상군방바 디기 엔디기 당화데 초탐제도 타geb이 신부 나한테 제네 아주기 야와 천남베기 티젠시 나리아 가르웨 버지 디 유서레 디 신부베기 로기다 디 가사데디 티디 여자.
The next one is Kunpangba. So this is Shang Kunpangba. So Shang means the name of his clan, and he is responsible for spreading these instructions very widely. He spread them very widely. In fact, in the Jonang lineage, this is included among the 4 great instructions that they have, this instruction from Tsengbupa.
가르스나다 샹군밤바기 디 당와나서디 야와이시레 다버지 장심 야와이시 이스레 드린 주산에 장심 야와이시 남이 주산에 다 장수 교회 시대 아주 전환기 르유나네 다 개심십 자리어래 다는 신기 공 당부 주진 뻑시기 까마 뻑시기 다 섭지르잖아 수변을 수제 슝게 되게 섭지잖아 나래 네 인주스탄에 다 이 장수 교회 시대 나체
So Shankung Pampa, the reason that for this is because Shankung Pampa gave it to Gyalwa Yeshe, and Gyalwa Yeshe was one of the important figures in the lineage of Jonang gurus. He was originally an attendant of the great Mahasiddha Karma Pakchi. So this is Gyalwa Yeshe.
다디 겨이시기 기준의 야솔나 기준의 야솔기 취지 군견 첨부사디 군견 전화부 첨부래 군견 전화부 첨부 려 낭네 다드네마 냥고연의 망고 송도아 다디게 시에 먹어체 다드네 냥고연 군가베 냥고연 소남 상부 다디기 잡배 상부스 아주 뱅가른 잡배 상부 까마바 누가 최라게 저기 달라마 라메 저 니야래 다디난 지 차디야래 다다 까마감상 tun규 텔 쇼데베지 도 차디야래 제가 드는 말을 메시는 귀데베지 까마감상 귀데베지 드리제샤
And so Ketsun Yunun Gyatso gave it to Chuje Kenshin Chempo, and this refers to the great Jonang master, Jonang Chempo. And then we don't need to belabor the next two, the Nyawun Kunga Pal and the Nyawun Sunam Sampo. And then it was passed to the Kunchen Chambal Sampo. So Kunchen Chambal Sampo was one of the two primary gurus of the seventh Karmapa Chuda Gyatso. And for this reason, he is included in the actual lineage or the true lineage of the Karma Kaju. And from then on, it has been passed down in the Karma Kaju tradition.
마시다리 아주 군주의 팀이 수백 방불이야 안 도망 아주 전환기 아주 구섭도스에 된지슈아래 안 다리 군주의 시야 그 최대야 통마대야 다디 군계 다 전환바 되는 마 규베 최 내지 시야를 두shum이 인도 된데 다 지난 그 된지 비숨 사바로 딕송 사바로 정도.
Now here in this 20th Kaju Gunsha, we have invited for the first time a Kempo from the Jonang lineage to be one of the judges. And so during this occasion, to also be able to teach a Dharma that has been passed down from the great Jonang master, the Kunchen Jonang Chempo, I think is a really wonderful interconnection, both in terms externally and internally.
다디기 주진 친부반마 유베기 아니 제레스기 가르쳐다 머티 세난다도 머티도 다 가이 총마송다 머티 사데 지 가르쳐 티 세버지디 아버지도 슈투마송 다이네 다든데 지미다 다 다란 죽투베 에서니네 님보된숨지 티데 마샤이.
And so this completes the instructions on the direct instructions on the Great Compassionate One from Tsimbupa. We call these a direct instruction, but a direct instruction didn't really happen. A direct instruction should be really clear, but I didn't explain it either very clearly or very well. But in any case, we have concluded this instruction. And so from tomorrow, we will have the teachings on the three essential points.
도 다 대차부스도 님부대서 티디나로라야 지당기 다외 고르망부스송샤 디나 가샤 디스도 라버도 제종가베 셴부 다 우마 치르베서 말베 텔레야 지디스 가샤로 나지 드망부스도 제산디 간데르식 가샤 간디지 시에고 다디지 ngazu de chue she yung gaksha ru che den yabas kemen do wa ta ine kande ru chi ta gaksha kande ru chi charo ya ha gumen do ta ine ta 지 삼도단제 간데르 슈고도 삼도단제 에 강도도 슈예
Now, the three essential points are actually a little difficult. There's some very thorny issues there. In particular, there's a lot about the view. There are a lot of refutations. In particular, there are refutations of Lord Tsongkhapa, the later middle way. So there are many refutations of this, and I have to think about how I'm actually going to explain this. It's not so good to always teach refutations when you're teaching the Dharma, but they're there, and so I have to think about how I will treat those. In any case, I will do my best to teach them.